There is a moment from weeks ago, maybe months, that your mind keeps replaying. An argument you lost, a rejection you didn't see coming, something you said that you wish you hadn't. And no matter how many times you rerun it, it never resolves. A former slave named Epictetus had something precise to say about why that loop exists and how to break it. Epictetus was born into slavery in the Roman city of Hierapolis, in what is now Western Turkey, sometime around 50 AD. He was owned by a man named Epaphroditus, a freedman who had risen to become a secretary in Nero's imperial court. This was not a gentle household. Epictetus had no control over his body, his location, his daily labor, or his safety. There is a story, possibly legend, possibly true, that his owner once twisted his leg deliberately to test whether Epictetus would show pain. Epictetus said calmly, "You are going to break it." And when it broke, he said, "I told you so." Whether or not the story is literal, it captures something real about the conditions that forged his thinking. He had every reason to be consumed by bitterness and memory. He was eventually freed, moved to Rome, and began teaching philosophy in the streets and doorways of the city. Later exiled by the Emperor Domitian, he settled in Nicopolis in northwestern Greece and ran a school for the rest of his life. He never wrote anything down. What we have comes from a student named Arrian who transcribed his lectures. Everything Epictetus taught emerged from a life in which external control was simply not available to him. The core of Epictetus's philosophy is a concept he called prohairesis, a Greek word that literally means the faculty of choice, or more precisely, the choosing before. It refers to the interior act of decision-making, not what happens to you, but how you meet what happens to you. It is the one thing, he argued, that no master, no emperor, no circumstance could ever take away. He opens the Enchiridion, his handbook, with this exact distinction. Some things are in our power, he writes, and some are not. In our power are opinion, motivation, desire, and aversion. Not in our power are the body, reputation, external circumstances, and the actions of others. This sounds simple. It is not. The entire weight of his philosophy rests on taking this division seriously rather than just nodding at it. When you replay a memory, you are, in Epictetus's framework, experiencing a failure of prohairesis. You are treating a past external event as though it still possesses active power over your inner faculty of choice. The event is gone. The impression of the event remains. And crucially, your judgment about that impression is what gives it its sting. He writes, "It is not things that disturb us, but our judgments about things." That sentence is not rhetorical. It is anatomically precise. What Epictetus identified that modern psychology later confirmed is that the replay loop is not a memory problem. It is a judgment problem. You are not just rewatching the film of what happened. You are rerunning the verdict that it was wrong, that you were wronged, that it should have been different, that someone owes you something that will never arrive. The memory itself is neutral. The judgment attached to it is where the suffering lives. The first technique is called the Judgment Audit, and it works directly with prohairesis. The next time you notice you're in the replay loop, stop the film, and instead of watching the event again, examine the sentence running underneath it. There is always a sentence, something like, "He should have respected me," or "I shouldn't have said that," or "This was unfair." Find the exact sentence. Now ask 3 questions about that sentence in this order. First, is this sentence describing what happened or what I believe should have happened? Second, does my insistence that it should have been different actually change anything about what occurred? Third, is the pain coming from the event itself or from my continued prosecution of a case that has no jury and no verdict date? These questions are not rhetorical exercises. They are interrupts in a cognitive loop. Here is a specific example. A man named Daniel was passed over for a promotion 6 months ago. His manager gave the role to someone less experienced, and Daniel believes, probably correctly, that it was a political decision, not a merit-based one. He replays the meeting constantly. The injustice is real, but his judgment audit reveals the sentence underneath. This should not have been allowed to happen in a fair world. Daniel is not suffering from the promotion decision. He is suffering from the gap between the world as it is and the world as he insists it should be. Once Daniel locates that sentence, he has something to work with. He cannot change the promotion decision. He cannot install fairness retroactively into his organization. But he can stop prosecuting the case in his own mind every morning on the commute. The judgment audit doesn't tell him the injustice wasn't real. It tells him that his inner life does not have to remain the courtroom for an appeal that will never be heard. That distinction is where his proheresis lives. The second technique is what we might call role reassignment. Epictetus used a theatrical metaphor repeatedly in his teachings. Life is a play, and your role has been assigned to you. Your job is not to rewrite the play, but to perform your assigned role excellently. The replay loop, in this metaphor, is what happens when you refuse your assigned role and keep auditioning for a different one, the role of the person to whom this didn't happen. Role reassignment asks you to make a deliberate shift in perspective. Instead of asking, "Why did this happen to me?" ask, "Given that this did happen to me, what is now the best version of the role I am in?" This is not resignation. Epictetus was explicit that playing your role excellently includes taking action where action is possible. The shift is from relitigating the casting to focusing on the performance you can actually give from where you stand. Consider a woman named Sarah who was in a relationship that ended badly. Her partner was dishonest, and she feels both betrayed and embarrassed that she didn't see it sooner. She replays conversations, looking for the clues she missed. Her loop keeps her in the role of the person who was deceived, examining the evidence of her own blindness. But that role, the deceived woman rereading old texts, is not a role with anywhere to go. Role reassignment asks Sarah to ask, "What role am I actually in now?" She is now the person who went through this experience and is on the other side of it. What does that person do? What does she know that the earlier version of herself didn't? What is now available to her that wasn't before? These are not questions designed to minimize her pain. They are questions that give her proheresis something to act on, rather than leaving it circling the wreckage. The third technique, and the one that requires the most practice, is what Epictetus's student Marcus Aurelius would later call returning to the present task. But in Epictetus's own work, it appears as the discipline of attention. The trained refusal to let the faculty of judgment wander into territories it cannot affect. We'll call it the present anchor. It is not distraction. It is something more precise and more demanding. The mechanics are this. When you notice the replay beginning, you do not fight the memory or try to replace it with positive thoughts. Instead, you deliberately identify one thing in front of you that is making a legitimate demand on your attention right now. Not a distraction, a genuine demand. A task at work, a conversation happening, a decision that needs to be made, a body that needs to move. You redirect your proheresis towards something it can actually affect. Epictetus taught that attention, like a muscle, follows where you point it repeatedly. Each time you notice the loop beginning and redirect your focus to the present demand, even imperfectly, you are performing a small act of proheresis. You are exercising the faculty. Over time, the loop doesn't disappear immediately, but it loses its automatic quality. It becomes a prompt rather than a command. You notice it and you choose. Here's a concrete version. A man named Marcus, not that one, lies awake at 2 a.m. replaying an argument he had with his brother at Christmas 3 months ago. His body is in bed, his attention is at a dinner table in December. Using the present anchor, he does not try to resolve the argument in his head again. He identifies the present demand. His body needs sleep to function tomorrow. He places his attention on his breathing, not as a meditation technique, as an act of proheresis. His breath is here. His judgment can be here too. Now, there is a very common misreading of Epictetus that turns people away from this practice, and it is worth addressing directly. Many people hear the dichotomy of control and conclude, Epictetus is telling me not to care about what happened, that this is about detachment, emotional suppression, or pretending that unfair things don't matter. This is almost exactly wrong, and it tends to make the philosophy feel cold and inhuman. Epictetus was not telling you that the promotion decision was fine, or that the betrayal didn't wound you, or that the grief isn't real. He was a man who had his leg broken by someone who owned him. He knew what real injury felt like. His argument is not that you should feel nothing. His argument is that your suffering is concentrated in the judgment you keep attaching to the memory, not in the memory itself, and the judgment is yours to examine. The other common pitfall is treating this as a one-time fix. People try the judgment audit once, feel marginally better, and then conclude that either it works perfectly or it doesn't work at all. Proheresis is a practice, not a switch. Epictetus ran a school for decades. He didn't do this because people needed one lecture. He did it because the faculty of choice requires continual exercise, especially under conditions of real pressure. And finally, some people avoid this practice because they suspect that letting go of the replay loop means letting the other person off the hook. If I stop replaying this, does that mean what they did was acceptable? Epictetus would say, you have confused your inner life with a verdict. Your continued suffering is not a form of justice. It is not punishment for the other party. It is, in fact, the only ongoing punishment, and it is falling entirely on you. Here's what ties these three techniques together. The judgment audit, role reassignment, and the present anchor are all expressions of the same underlying movement, reclaiming your faculty of choice from a past that cannot respond to it. Epictetus, a man who owned nothing, who had no legal personhood, who could not control where he slept or whether his limbs remained intact, built an entire philosophy around the one sovereign territory available to him, how he met each moment. You are not a slave, but you may have handed something very like ownership of your attention to a memory, to a person who isn't in the room, an event that isn't happening anymore, a verdict that exists only inside your own mind. What Epictetus discovered in the most extreme conditions imaginable is that this handover is always voluntary, even when it doesn't feel that way. And that means it can be undone, not all at once, not perfectly, but deliberately. The replay loop feels like a problem of memory. Epictetus shows us it is a problem of misplaced judgment. And judgment is always, even now, even at 2 a.m., even after the worst of it, within your reach. Not because you are invulnerable, because you have proheresis. That has always been enough to begin with. If something in this gave you a foothold on something you've been carrying, I'm glad it reached you. And if you're not just stuck in a loop, but stuck in a decision, unable to move forward, that's what the next video is about. Marcus Aurelius had a specific method for cutting through that paralysis. It's called Why You Can't Decide Anymore, Marcus Aurelius's Cure.